maybe let's get started with introductions in the meantime. So hello everyone, I'm Dr. Sandile Hlatshwayo. I'm VP of Professional Development and Mentoring for BPIA, and we're really delighted that you could join us this evening. We are going to jump right in, and I'm going to actually ask for each panelist to give your name, tell us what organization you're from, tell us what your organization does, and then specifically talk about your role within the organization. So Jewel, if you want to get started.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone that's tuned in. My name is Jewel McFadden, and I work at the World Bank, which provides technical and financial assistance to developing countries around the world. We work on a lot of different types of projects related to infrastructure, education, agriculture and food security, climate change, and much more. For instance, right now, the really big hot topic in the news is COVID. So over the next 15 months, we'll provide, I think, around $160 billion in financial support for COVID relief. And a lot of that support goes to fragile and conflict affected areas such as Mali and Haiti. And at the bank, I wear two hats. My full-time job is I'm an acquisitions editor. And what that means is I'm the first point of contact whenever someone wants to publish through the World Bank Publications brand. They talk with me and I go over things like governance and peer review standards that we have as a publisher. And then my other role is with Globe, which is the World Bank's LGBT employee resource group. And I'm the outreach and inclusion chair for Globe.
Thank you very much. Danny, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Danny Ryan here. I'm a public affairs and marketing consultant for the OECD Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We're an intergovernmental organization. We are headquartered actually in Paris, where we have 3,000 employees, but I'm part of the OECD Washington Center, where we are a small but dynamic team of just under 10. What the OECD does is essentially give policy advice and guidance to our 37 member countries and indeed non-member countries. Some examples I can give and sort of rankings and policy advice. Some of you may be familiar with PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, where the program essentially ranks countries for education. You may have seen last year the OECD Artificial Intelligence framework or principles that were signed by all our member countries as well as non-member countries as a kind of a framework and a sort of standard to kind of get to when implementing AI and the challenges that will face. So what the OECD tries to do is harness cooperation to set standards and to level the playing field for businesses and indeed government to ensure fair policies that, and our slogan, to ensure better policies for better lives. In my role here in Washington, as I mentioned, Public Affairs Communications, we act as a sort of embassy for the OECD. So I kind of describe it as 50% of our work is newsletters and social media, doing webinars like this, which we're sort of be a part of and spreading the gospel of the OECD. The other 50% is acting as a resource for the rest of the organization. So before COVID, we would welcome a lot of our senior leadership and policymakers, and we would set up events for them, and we would do briefing notes. Now it's more switched to webinars. So that's a little bit about sort of the OECD and my role in the OECD Washington Center. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to diving in.
Great, thanks for those introductions. I guess I'll go ahead and introduce myself professionally. I'm an economist at the International Monetary Fund. The IMF promotes international monetary cooperation, economic stability. We provide policy advice, community and capacity development support. We also are more infamously known for providing loans. And we help countries by designing policy programs to navigate moments of economic stress. Now, within the fund, I work within the macro risk unit, where I identify and evaluate emergent risks around the globe for our 189 member countries. And we do crisis prediction modeling, we do text-based analytics, so scraping newspaper articles and words and using that to tell us something about the current zeitgeist. We also do strategic foresight activities like wargaming. So let me get into the questions as I again try and bring in some of the other panelists as they join. So the IMF has a really complicated history. And I think part of the reason for that is that we tended to view economic strength and resiliency through too few indicators, namely growth in the past. And over the past decade, there's been really heroic efforts within the organization to adopt a more holistic approach to what it means for a country to be thriving, to be resilient. And that's included centering work on inequality, on gender discrimination, on the environment. And I'd like for each of you to talk a little bit about your respective organizations, where you see that there are gaps and issues, and what ideas you had around addressing those current challenges.
Sure, Sandile, I'm happy to kick this off. I would say one criticism that one might see about the OECD is that our membership is too narrow, it's too small. We're 37 member countries. The IMF and World Bank are 120 plus. The same with kind of WTO and UN and other multilateral organizations. However, over the last sort of 10 years, countries like Chile and Lithuania and Estonia and Costa Rica have joined. And I would say that an important thing to remember about to know about the OECD is that we are a consensus-based organization. What that means is when our organization is making a decision, whether it's adapting a framework for international cooperation or a budget issue at the organization, all 37 member countries have to agree. If one says no, it's back to the drawing board. So actually having a sort of smaller group of sort of like-minded, advanced economies is actually a strength. And as you can probably imagine, it makes it a lot easier to get consensus. As opposed to, if we were, if it was a sort of 60-40 split. So that's not to say, though, that the OECD ignores other non-member countries. We have established, structures such as our Global Relations Secretariat. We have relations with China, with India, and Brazil. So we are engaged with them and we're sort of advising them and giving them policy advice, as well as listening to them, and they're putting their policy on the table for OECD scrutiny. And, ultimately, it is up to the OECD member countries. I am just sort of a civil servant, for want of a better phrase, within the OECD and the Secretariat. So the kind of big political decisions are way above my pay grade. But, in terms of going forward and expanding the membership, it is ultimately up to OECD members to ensure that, new countries sort of adapt and sort of, in order to safeguard the high standards that come along with being a member of the OECD and ensuring the spirit of cooperation within the organization.
For that, consensus sounds difficult, especially right now. Jewel, do you want to share a little bit about how you view the bank right now and the challenges you have for addressing it?
Yeah, I was going to say, the bank has thousands of projects going on, so I don't think I can necessarily pinpoint on a project level what the bank should be doing more or less of. But I think from my perspective, working more so in knowledge, our main focus is to get reliable data and research to the policymakers and practitioners who need it most to make sound decisions. So we just continue to look for ways to get the knowledge out there. Primarily, we're a book publisher, but over time, we're too trying to explore ways to disseminate the knowledge, whether it be maybe a podcast or maybe it's, learning about What's Up app and how people are using technology in different ways. So it's just trying to keep ahead of the curve and making sure that the people who need the research and the data actually get it. So that's my primary undertaking from a publishing perspective.
It's a great point. So part of why I was really excited to talk to both of you is that you kind of showed this additional element of diversity for entering international affairs, and that you're both communications experts within these big multilateral organizations. Can you touch a little bit more on who is your target market? Who are you trying to talk to? Is it governments? Is it the common people? Is it economists like me? Jewel, do you want to? You're like, we're definitely not trying to talk to you.
No. I was going to say actually all of the above, but yeah, I would definitely say, as far as publications wise, yeah, it's policymakers and practitioners. The cream of the crop is when we're cited in some policy document and we see that the research we're doing is actually being applied. So that's our primary audience. But then, if you expand it to broader communications and we're diving more into like podcasts, because we do want to also reach people that didn't necessarily have a PhD in economics. We're also trying to reach the college students and get them to understand more of how the world economy works. But yeah, to reach those audiences, you just have to package the knowledge in different ways so that it's understood by different audiences.
I'll add, very similar to what Jules said about the World Bank. The OECD, our sort of motto, as I mentioned earlier, is better policies for better lives. So similar to what Jules said, it's policymakers and practitioners. Now, we engage with many stakeholders through our Business Industry and Advisory Committee, so BIAC for the private sector, TUAC, our Trade Union Advisory Committee, so for trade unions. We also have civil society events such as the OECD Forum that happens every year. In terms of just Washington Center, and to kind of make things a little bit more practical, because I like to do that for those who are listening in, in terms of the relations that we're an office of 10 at the OECD Washington Center, and we don't have that much money to spend on digital advertising, so we can be very strategic in who we engage with. Obviously, we would love to engage with all policymakers who are engaged and interested in OECD work, but primarily it's State Department, and when in that, the economic desk who looks who kind of monitors international organizations, Council of Economic Advisors at the White House. We also manage congressional relations and facilitate meetings between our policy experts and those on the Hill. We do our best to kind of be everywhere and to be very shameless and to kind of fly the OECD flag, as well as promoting careers at the OECD. But in summary, the answer is policymakers, and we try and reach as many as we possibly can. But due to the fact that we are a small but dynamic office here in Washington, we have to be laser focused with our engagement with, and we do our best to spread our wings as much as we can. Just use the resources, but those would be the kind of primary, the kind of macro kind of people that we're looking at. But then specifically in DC, as I mentioned, State Department, Council of Economic Advisors, they would be the people who are kind of interacting with, maintaining relationships on a daily basis.
You were saying what I was thinking was coffee. Because you're for a 10-person outfit, that's a lot, a lot. And so we're really, really excited to have Dr. Sise join us. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Sise,
it's been quite a challenge to try to join you.
Yeah, we're having some tech issues this evening, but we're really glad that you were able to make it through. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your organization, what your organization does, and then your specific role within it.
Well, name is Lamin Sise. I spent over 30, 40 years with the United Nations. First at the Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, and then Office of Legal Affairs. My background is essentially law. I'm a lawyer for the UN, and 17 years or so in the legal office in New York, and peacekeeping department, about 3-4 years, and then the rest of my career with the former Secretary General Kofi Annan. And when he left, I left them also. I was asked back twice by Ban Ki-moon and Antonio Guterres as well. And now, having, I think I'm given up on everything, my home country, Gambia, asked me to go back to Gambia and head them at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is what I'm doing now. I'm taking a break from that. I was stuck in the Gambia for 9 months. I just got back 2 days ago, able to fly and get out of the Gambia. But that's what I'm doing. I don't know what exactly you want me to contribute to this discussion, but that's
that was perfect. Quite a storied career, and that's wonderful now that you're willing to go home and serve your country. I think that's the perfect thing to do in terms of a second career. So one thing that we were just talking about was looking at our respective organizations and really trying to figure out where there are gaps, where there are challenges, and how we think our organizations could address them. And so maybe, like, given that you've had such a long time with the UN, where do you kind of see the UN in 2020, its role, where there are major gaps and issues that need to be closed, and what your ideas are to close them? This is like the preamble to your book that you're going to write now. And by the way, if you could just turn your tablet the other way, you're horizontal right now.
I am not sure I know how to do that.
Okay, no worries. You can stay as is.
I'm turned them the other way around here and there. I see myself on the screen with my head in the right.
Okay, yeah. No worries.
What do I do? Anything to adjust?
Yeah.
This?
So looking back on your career at the UN, like what challenges and issues, kind of as you were walking away, did you see, and how do you think the organization could rise to the occasion to meet those challenges, specifically in the context of where we are in 2020?
The United Nations, in general, do you want me to get back to San Francisco in 1945? How this whole thing was formulated and what was expected. What I can tell you is from at least from Kofi Annan's perspective, what we were doing as Secretary General, and what exactly we thought we should be taking the United Nations into the future. One, get it closer to the people. You cannot have an institution of this type that is supposed to be saving succeeding generations from the scourge of war, getting caught up in things that don't lead to that. The expectations are very high. Some think that the organization was established to eliminate, to abolish war, when that was not the case. This was a collective security institution with lots of things that needed to be done around that collective security. So if a Secretary General is not conscious of the limitations, it has great potentials, no doubt, but if he's not conscious of the limitations of the organization, I think it would be going in the wrong direction. The challenges of 2020 are enormous, with this recent pandemic adding on to that, complicating matters. But I think it's the awareness of the SG that would direct the work of this institution for 2020. I don't want to ramble just like that, and perhaps some specific questions I can answer.
That was perfect. Thank you very, very much. So even prior to COVID-19, it felt like there was growing animosity against global institutions like the UN, like the OECD, like the IMF, like the World Bank. And if you could predict going forward, looking into the future, if you could, where do you see our respective roles headed as multilaterals? So do we think that governments will come back to the table, that there'll be a willingness to resume these multilateral, complicated, tricky conversations, but all important? Or do you envision, for instance, regional or bilateral structures rising in our stead? And I'm happy for anyone to begin. Any volunteers in terms of who wants to start off?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think that reports of the death of multilateralism are somewhat, I think, exaggerated. I think it's true that over the last few years we've hit some bumps in the road, and there's numerous reports and polling to show that citizens have a growing distrust with whether it's organizations like OECD, or whether it's government, or whether it's media. There's just a growing distrust amongst experts, so to speak. But the fact is, governments continue to ask organizations such as mine, the OECD, to play a major role in managing the kind of economic effects of globalization, and we do this by providing policy advice and evidence-based data and policies. And for example, last year I mentioned earlier the artificial intelligence framework signed by 37 member countries of the OECD, including the United States, and indeed non-member countries. The G7 and indeed the G20 tasked the OECD with sort of, how do we, tax our increasingly digitized, so countries are coming to the OECD. I can't speak for the IMF, World Bank, or other institutions, but countries that are in our member country are still coming to us and coming to the table to discuss these increasingly complex but also global issues. The issues that we face, are not just for one country. If it's a big enough problem, it's going to have a spillover effect and it's going to have an impact on other countries. So, looking to the future in terms of, the issues may change, but the need for evidence-based policy, advice and consensus building is not going to go away because you can't effectively tackle these global challenges regionally or bilaterally. And, in my opinion, if we didn't have intergovernmental organizations right now, we would need to invent them. So those would be my words for an answer to multilateral organizations going forward.
Jewel, Dr. Sise?
I was going to say, well said, Daniel. I'm in complete agreement. I think it makes for a saucy headline, but I think at the end of the day, as Daniel said, no, it's definitely needed. And if we weren't around, the need would come and we would be creating these sorts of institutions. Looking at the pandemic right now, I mentioned earlier, the World Bank Group has mobilized around $160 billion to deal with the health, the economic and social shocks from COVID. And that's not an easy thing to do. So I think, when something like this happens, people look to those huge organizations like the bank, IMF, and other multilaterals for assistance. So I think it just goes to show there is definitely still a need there.
To add to that, Dr. Sise?
Just call me Lamin.
Okay.
Yeah, please. And I think the focus, in my view, is now lost on globalization. A few years ago, this was the thing that we thought would be helping everybody, all countries, to move forward. That, for whatever domestic reasons, either the consequences of globalization, jobs leaving certain countries, that we've seen right-wing parties on attacks, having taken the position to attack globalization. That would need to be revisited. That would need to be reformed to a certain extent, so everybody would share in the in whatever benefits globalization is supposed to bring. So, for some reason, I think the UN would need to take leadership in that area. Would the organizations, regional ones in particular, the European Union, would they want them to encourage focus on globalization? I have my doubts, but I think with the right kind of leadership, we may be able to salvage some aspects of globalization without them really hurting the little man in the countries that these guys are going around saying, well, we need to protect these jobs here, we need to protect X, Y, Z in our countries.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that everyone said. COVID-19 has actually offered us a real opportunity in terms of multilaterals to again rise to happier headlines. When you think about what's going to happen once a vaccine or several vaccines are found, and the amount of global coordination that's going to need to occur, not only to produce it at scale, but then to distribute it all over the world. So now we're having conversations like with the WHO, with the WTO. It's just, there's immense scope for multilateralism to save the world in a way. So let me just go to the chat room here. There's some questions that are starting to come through from attendees. The first one is, how can we get more young people more involved in geopolitics? Does anyone want to take that one on? So getting more young people involved, interested in kind of big IR global politics conversations.
Sure, I'm happy to kick things off. I mean, first thing I would say is, attending this conference is the first thing that you can do, and anyone who's here is doing a great job. I mean, you have to be engaged. You have to make an effort. You have to, you know, in your spare time, you have to be going to, you know, evening time conferences like this. You have to be, you know, joining BPIA or Young Professionals in Foreign Policy or Global Shit. There's goodness knows how many DC groups that you can join and be active and engaged. And I think sometimes, and conversations I have with kind of college students is that they kind of think really big, international relations. I think it's really important as well to know what is it you want to do in international relations. Is it policy? Is it working on communications? Is it publishing? You know, what kind of role do you see yourself within an organization? The idea that you're going to be doing very high level meetings just out of college, maybe you will, maybe you're absolutely brilliant and fantastic, and credit to you. Likelihood is, you know, in order to get your foot in the door and start off in international relations, you know the kind of role that you want to play and what you're good at, what your talents are, and what your interests are. Because, you know, the OECD has 3,000 people in economics, education, finance, blockchain. Know what you want to do, focus, you know, and engage in the community. You know, there's a big community of the international relations, and coming to things like BPIA and attending other webinars and events, hopefully when we can go back to in-person events. You know, that for me would be a starting point. If you can do that, then things are just going to naturally come, and you know, opportunities are going to arise from that.
Great.
I would say, yeah, I was going to say, just to add on to what Daniel said, I would say, you know, find something you're passionate about. You know, as Daniel said, I think a lot of times people think really big picture, but maybe start off with something that affects you as an individual. Maybe think about how laws affect you as a woman, as a gay person, as a Black person. Find something that resonates with you and start there. That way, at least you're starting to educate yourself on something that you actually care about. And I think that above anything else will reflect in your work.
Well,
Lamin?
I think the challenge is really for the young people, as well as for people like us who are talking here, who are part of the system, to go out to educate these young people about the different organizations that we work for. Let me just say what I did when I was in the Gambia, both my secondary school, the boarding school that I went to. We established clubs, groups that were focusing on, as extracurricular thing, focusing on international affairs, international organizations. And that went on. Anywhere I went, I would engage the young people in that area and in establishing an institution. I went out from Gambia to Senegal in a high school there. I had them again, an organization established in the school, both primary and secondary, teaching them about international organizations, going to the UN office in Dakar, asking them to come and lecture. I was organizing lectures for these young people there. And then went on, came down to the US out here at both Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, where I went to, and at Sise as well. We had all these groups on international institutions doing that. And that is still continuing. Anytime I go, I came back about a year ago, after 2 years of lecturing at the university in China, the Peking University there. Again, group of students, young people, engaging them, telling them what these institutions are all about, because they have a very little knowledge of it, and especially the negative parts of what the United Nations is doing. I mean, or negative things that the people ascribe to the UN. Try to get that myth out, and then see. So it's engagement of the young people by us. That I think is something that we can use to promote education in that field, in helping them.
Fantastic. And there's a couple questions that are how to get into these organizations and why we join. So Tyler asked two questions. First is literally, how do you get your foot in the door? He hears that it's incredibly difficult to secure an internship or job. Doesn't mind the barriers. He just wants to figure out how best to position himself when he is ready to apply. And then he asked us all, why did we choose to work at Multilaterals?
I can maybe take the first part of the question, which is it's incredibly hard to get hired or get an internship in this organization, because I was one of those people too. My quick story is I remember applying to the World Bank and almost not showing up to the interview when I got it because I didn't think I had a chance in hell, honestly, at getting the job. I, like a lot of people, sort of thought, oh, everyone that works there, you must speak 5 languages, you must come from an Ivy League education or work for some other big organizations. And prior to coming to the bank, I was a small-time journalist from DC, and I wrote for a lot of, no-name newspapers and magazines. So I truly didn't think that my, pedigree lined up to everyone else at the bank, but I applied and showed up for the interview anyway. And one of the things that happened, at least during my interview, and perhaps I'm lucky in that way, but I was able to tie in sort of these other small newspapers or small jobs that I had and sort of, be able to explain to them how those skills can be transferable for even a big organization like the World Bank. And I didn't know anyone. I didn't come, with a recommendation. I didn't have any names to drop in the interview. And I strictly got it off of my interview. So I would, also just encourage, don't be too dissuaded from applying for a job because you think maybe you don't have the name that people are looking for. Get in there if you can at least make it to the interview and sell yourself. Because not everyone gets a job just based on who they know. It wasn't my experience.
So Neil, I'll follow next. Kind of what I said earlier about knowing what it is that you want to do in terms of foot in the door, and the reason I say that is because if you know what you're passionate about, you're interested in, you kind of can correlate what you studied and what you've got some experience in. It makes it not only easier, but you can identify opportunities a lot better, and you're going to connect with the right people. Because if I get a lot of people sort of saying, I'm interested in working at the OECD, and I say that's fantastic. What are you interested in? They say economics and development, which is like the E and D of OECD, so half of the organization. Whereas if they come to me and say, they've written papers on blockchain or climate change, yeah, I know someone in that, and let me make introductions. I mean, there is an element of networking. I'm not going to lie. I mean, Joe mentioned how she got into the World Bank. I was studying in the Netherlands, and there was an event in Brussels. So I got up at 5 a.m. I went down there, and there was a member of the OECD speaking by chance, and I introduced myself after, and through him I was able to get an interview and get my foot in the door and get an internship. That's not to say that everyone needs to be getting up at 5 a.m. to go to events in Belgium or it's strictly networking. But I do think that you need to show an interest in a particular topic and kind of know how to speak to that, because at the end of the day, institutions like IMF, World Bank, OECD, we are expert driven institutions. So when I'm talking to a colleague who works in economics, that person is an expert in economics and education. So you're not really going to fool anyone or kind of get involved in something that you're not wholeheartedly behind. So what I would say is, and kind of similar to what I said earlier, in terms of getting your foot in the door first, maybe have 2 to 3 job ideas in your head. Like, what is it that I would like to do at this organization on a day-to-day basis? See if there are sort of opportunities, within that organization that fit that job description. Start applying, start adding people on LinkedIn, start networking, start engaging in events like BPIA, and opportunities will hopefully, and they should, arise as people see that you do have an interest and that they're willing to make introductions on your behalf. Or when you apply to positions, you're going to just be more confident because you're going to see that job and say, hey, I can really do this position because I have studies in this, I've written papers on this, I've engaged, I know who the kind of main actors are in this field. So you're going to be a lot more confident, and you're going to apply with a bit more gust and a bit more vigor. So that would be my advice to anyone tuning in terms of getting your foot in the door at a multilateral organization.
Yeah, Lamin?
Well, the background that I'm coming from is a slightly different one. But what I would put emphasis on, at least in my own case, it was more focus. Right from high school, I was very clear what I wanted to do. International organizations, international relations, and involved in that one. Courses that I did in high school, courses that I did essentially in at university, was essentially the same. Having a foot in the door here and there, no, as I said, I come from a background that is very, very different from perhaps many who have joined these organizations. From a very poor background, didn't have proper shoes until I was 15 years old. Also, but it didn't bother me. It didn't. I didn't think that that was a necessity for anything. Went off on my own. Paid my education throughout the thing until I finished law school, essentially on my own. And literally, and this is where my background doesn't help any person who wants to come in. I literally never applied for any job. I worked at the World Bank briefly. They asked me to come from. I was finishing law at the University of Cambridge in England, and the bank invited me to come back. When I was at Sise, at the end of the master's program, I had an offer from what is now Citibank to join. I didn't want to join the organization, Citibank. I wanted to continue with the PhD at Sise. I did that there. So when I left, when I was at the bank, I had 3 offers from the UN, and then decided to do it. So I literally, I didn't apply for anything at all. Somehow offers just come. And so I don't know if that would help anybody. I'm not too sure.
We need your karma. But I appreciated all of your different perspectives on that question. My multilateral background, I mean, it starts really, really early. So I'm first gen American. My father's South African, my mother's Guyanese, and I was born and raised in Ohio. So really, my entire childhood was policy questions, right? It's why does my entire Guyanese family live in New York? It's when we go to South Africa to visit that part of the family, why even within South Africa, different parts of the family have very, very different experiences in terms of socioeconomics. And when you're a kid, you can't ask elders those questions, right? They're like wildly inappropriate. And so as I was continuing to matriculate through school, I kept that curiosity though. And starting after undergrad, I went to policy school. During policy school, it became clear to me that I wanted a deeper toolkit. So I decided to do the PhD. And then once I was within the PhD, I said, where is there a space where I can have the most impact as an economist? Where is it like the most courageous in terms of applying the wonderful toolkit that I've been given to answer these policy questions that I've had since I was 4 years old? And for me, as an international macroeconomist, that was very, very clearly the IMF. And so I applied for an internship. I was lucky to get one actually working on South Africa, and wrote a paper, networked like crazy that summer, and then applied once I graduated and was given the full-time offer. So that's my own personal story. But what I always tell my mentees, as they're saying, how can I position myself, like Tyler did, is, and it really, really overlaps with what several things you said, especially Jewel and Daniel, is number one, take risks. The number of cold emails that I put out there when I was trying to get research assistantships with different professors, you just say, hey, do you want like free labor? This is my skill set. Which brings me to a second point, which is have a skill set. Have something to offer these organizations, these people on day one. I can show up, I can do this job for you. I don't necessarily need training. I'm not going to bother you about being invited to these heady meetings and giving my opinion, like I'm going to show up and do this job for you. So that gets to Daniel's point about being very specific and having a specific skill set to bring them. I want to get to Brandy's question because it links to a broader issue of working in multilaterals. She asked, how do you feel to be the best at your role if you're part of a small office in a larger organization? But more broadly for all the panelists, how do you navigate the bureaucracies of our gigantic organizations successfully? How do you affect change when there's thousands of people that have opinions?
I'm happy to kind of answer for I think the small office might have been referred to my slim OECD office here in Washington. In terms of being the best, I think the first thing is that what I love about working at the OECD Washington Center is my colleagues are, we what's the word I'm looking for? We trust each other. There's a lot of transparency. We all have our role. So, my day-to-day is there's clients at the OECD headquarters that I'm looking after. There's day-to-day, I'm, behind the Zoom operations anytime we have a webinar, and there's external meetings that I'm responsible for. I think in terms of standing out, it's more, taking ownership of what you're responsible for and executing. And an anecdote I can say is during the summer, we had quite a big webinar which included our Secretary General and included a member from the White House. It was my job to make sure that they had the Zoom links, that they were able to access it. A lot of US government agencies have banned Zoom. Thankfully, I found that the White House hadn't, making sure that our Secretary General had the link and what email. And I did all that. So when our head of office said to me, Danny, where are, and I was able to tell him very calmly, Will, 1, 2, 3, it's all sorted. And he said, Danny, thank you so much. So in terms of standing out, in our office, if we do our job, which has impact on everyone, because if I screw up on the Zoom, then that's going to annoy someone and that's going to cause a derailing later on. So in terms of standing out, it's more knowing your job, knowing your portfolio, and executing. And that's kind of what we all focus on in our office. And just I'll carry on a little bit in terms of the bureaucracy. One small, one sort of small thing, practical thing that I've been doing is over the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of youth outreach here at the Washington Center. I put on several events in our office and also webinars. And I think in terms of navigating bureaucracy, I think it's important to, if you're interested in something, is to sort of start small and sort of build up a body of work and sort of milestones and numbers that you can point to and say, hey, this is what I've been doing. And, that's led me to work more with colleagues back in Paris, and we're kind of figuring out OECD youth webpage, which needs a bit of a revamp. We had a webinar with 50 attendees and one of our deputy secretary generals, which is a big win for our office. So in terms of navigating, bureaucracies, I think it's, understand your role and build up a body of work and a portfolio. And, I like to think my youth outreach has had some impact and has yielded positive results. Time will tell. But in terms of navigating bureaucracies, I think it's best to, like I said, in terms of work at the Washington Center, come in, do your job, make sure that you, take care of your brief, and that's going to make everything run smoothly. Build up a portfolio and body of work, and as time progresses, you're going to be seen as a expert or someone who, a go-to person for youth matters or whatever matters you're working on.
Joel, Lamin?
Yeah, I guess one success story as far as cutting through the bureaucracy. I'm going to put my globe hat on. And so I mentioned that's the LGBT employee resource group at the World Bank. And one thing that we did is we did a survey, and the survey came back and said that 45% of the people at the World Bank who identify as LGBT don't feel comfortable being out in the workplace. And then we also got some other responses. One of them said something like the World Bank should adopt a don't ask, don't tell policy. Another respondent said that LGBT people have no place at the World Bank. They shouldn't be allowed to work in the workplace. So we were able to take all of those results, and that served as sort of the backing for a number of initiatives that we were trying to push. And so one thing I will say about the bank is one thing they value is data. So having that survey, having that data allowed us to sort of cut through the noise. And a lot of people were taken back by the results because they think, oh, we're in this large multicultural institution, but being in a large multicultural institution doesn't necessarily mean that you've created this safe and inclusive workplace for everyone. So we were able to, sit down with senior management and discuss, the safety and security and mobility issues surrounding LGBT staff that I don't think we would have otherwise gotten if we didn't have that data in our hand.
Lamin.
I believe for me, it's really more dedication to one's work and the focus as well, and hard work. At the end of the day, if your bosses recognize that and they give you the opportunity also, because that is very important. And for me, when I joined the UN in '77 in Geneva, it was that very moment that my bosses really got me into the circle. They didn't say, well, here's a rookie coming from university. He doesn't know anything yet. Let him just do some research, and they give us this piece of paper. And growth comes very slowly when you are in that kind of a situation. No, they took me very much into their confidence. And that is very important. Trust from the top, and these fellows involving you in that. That sort of, for me, helped me throughout the career. Again, another area where it is not an example thing out there. I never, the 30, 40 years with the UN, never ever discussed the word promotion with my bosses. Anytime something comes up, I just say to them, thank you, you really didn't have to promote me. Let's go ahead and then do. But it's the work that you do in that area. I'll give you one or two a thing where trust was really at the heart of the whole thing with Secretary General Kofi Annan. We had gone to Sweden on a visit, the official visit, and excuse me, the prosecutor for the Yugoslav tribunal, Luis Abo, was a Supreme Court justice in Canada, wanted to talk to the Secretary General confidential, in a confidential way, but there was no crypto found that we had when we were traveling. We normally would have it, but we sent because we were going to Sweden, we, after going around 4 countries in Africa, we decided to let the technical expert go back to New York. And then what happened, the prosecutor wanted to talk to him. He said, I can't discuss this on the phone with you. Well, she's in The Hague, or in The Hague, and Sweden, Stockholm, where we were, wasn't very far. Said, fine. Can you look for crypto phones anywhere in Sweden that you can go to, SG, and then speak? SG then turned to me and said, what do we do? I said, well, I asked the Swedish ambassador, who was Swedish ambassador in New York, but visiting Sweden at the time of our visit. I said, does your prime minister have a secure line in his office? He said, no. Defense minister? No. Well, we think that the only person who would have a secure line here is probably the ambassador of the United States. And said, no, that's the last person we want to go to on this secret thing that we want to talk about. Anyway, so she ended up flying quickly to Stockholm, not knowing what she was coming for. I didn't know what she was coming for, but we held it a big secret just between the two of us. And then when she came in, we took her from the airport, rushed her through all the meeting out there. And then I said to the SG, do you two want to meet tete-a-tete, or do you want me to join you? I really didn't know what was coming, because Harry Belafonte was coming to meet with us, and I really wanted to see Harry Belafonte. I started singing.
That would help us. All right.
Jamaica, Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I just
But
do
anyway,
so just
it was the indictment of Milosevic that he said to me, well, this is the sealed indictment of Milosevic. We need to move our staff there very quickly from Belgrade, so they don't get kidnapped there, or they don't hold them hostage. So I had to get out of that meeting with only my underwear, straight to the airport, rest to London, and then a Concord to New York, and then so the Deputy Secretary General to move the stuff back. Now, what had happened? Nobody knew what was going on. He trusted me. He said, "I'm gonna go ahead and then do this." Now, when I was coming back, because now we had to tell a few countries that they need to move their staff out of Belgrade in the area. When the U.S. got it, Madeleine Albright's spokesman was James Rubin. James Rubin married to Christiane Amanpour, and he leaked it to Christiane Amanpour. By the time I arrived back in Sweden, Christiane had gone on CNN, breaking news, UN indicting Milosevic. Again, it's just a trust with the guys that they can take you this far once you do the thing with
Oh,
them.
that's such a good story. That's fantastic. And if I could add one thing to this cutting through the bureaucracy thing, it's actually something that all three of you are experts at, which is learning how to story tell. I cannot tell you how many smart people I work with, but the people that can actually persuasively tell a story, can persuasively guide you along with their thinking and get you to the end point where you almost think that you've discovered something, but they brought you there. That I think is a key skill set for cutting through these really large organizations, and you'll be immensely valued within the organization if you're able to communicate. And I see both of my communications experts are nodding because it's not an obvious thing. So we've got one last question that's come through before we come up on the hour, and it is from Victor, and he's asking, how important do you view mentorship? Do you believe mentorship is a must-have for students and new graduates to find opportunities?
I would say that I've never had sort of just one absolute sort of mentor, but I've been very fortunate in my career thus far, and also in college. In college, I had a Mr. Trainer who was also Irish like myself. He was not only a teacher, but we would go out drinking, and we were setting up the drama society, and he was very supportive in my efforts and giving me guidance, and the OECD, I've been very fortunate to have people who I can kind of call upon and get advice and kind of steer me in the right direction. So I think it's very important to know and find people who you're comfortable confining, sort of speaking very frankly with, whether it's kind of like a professional question or whether it's a kind of personal question and how you're doing. It may not be your manager. It may not be someone you work in your team or division. It can just be someone in the organization. They can be junior, they can be your level, they can be senior. So I do think it's important to, and hopefully those listening in will, during their time in college and also in their careers, they will have those people who they can text or they can email. You may not speak to them for months on end, but and they know that if they contact you or you contact them, it's going to be like like you were speaking yesterday. So I do think maybe not having a direct mentor. I mean, if someone has a direct mentor, fantastic. But I do think that having a few people in different stages of their career and their life is important, both for your kind of professional advancement and also for your kind of personal well-being and mental health. I think it's absolutely crucial to be able to kind of call upon people for advice. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say similarly. I don't have a set mentor, but I do have more senior people that I can talk to, and I do think it's important to have someone that you can speak candidly with and ask questions like, do you think I'm being underpaid? Or, what other roles do you, based on the skill set that I have, are there other roles that you think I may be a good fit for? Because sometimes the perfect job for you, you may not even know, the exact job title. You may not even know what it is that you're looking for, but someone more senior may say, oh, you're a really good public speaker, or you have really good, writing skills. And actually, I don't know, you may be good for stakeholder engagement or something like that. So definitely, I think it helps to have someone a little bit higher up in the food chain with more experience than you, who's sort of seen it all, been through it all, and someone that you trust. And like Daniel said, it may not necessarily, and oftentimes doesn't make sense for it to be your manager, because that's not necessarily someone you may feel comfortable asking the dumb questions to, right? So yeah, finding someone that you feel that you can be open and candid, and but also understanding that mentorship is a two-way street. So it's not just you're going to this person and asking, but also try to bring something to the table for them that shows why this relationship is worthwhile for them as well.
Perfect. Maria, welcome. We're actually on our question, but I want you to introduce yourself in case you get to network later with participants in the room. And if you could answer this question on mentoring. So your name, your organization, what you do within your organization, and then how do you view mentorship? Is it really, really important and need to have, or an option? Oh, you're muted.
First of all, thank you for having me, and I'm sorry I had a few technical problems, but it's a pleasure to be here, and I've been supportive of BPIA for some time now. My name is Ann Griffin, and I am with Unicef USA as Senior Director for Diaspora and Multicultural Partnerships. And for me, this is kind of an encapsulation of so many things that are important for international development, diversity, inclusion, and just this recognition of the importance of voice and relevance for what we do and why we do what we do. So, we all know that UNICEF is a humanitarian organization that tries to do as much as possible, focusing on children and families and communities, and really from a grassroots perspective. And, I feel honored to be a part of that. And certainly, after looking around and seeing, so many people who want to work in international development, but also seeing the dearth of those who are from communities of color. And so I just feel privileged to be here to speak to that importance, and also to encourage people to consider, UNICEF, and to question, the current status quo in terms of who's out there representing us. And so I wanted to just say that out front. In terms of mentorship, I mean, I've been in international development for a very long time, which is why the gray hairs. And I think that it's critical to just kind of plunge ahead and to seek, one-on-ones with individuals, but also to not be afraid to kind of be adventurous and to take the plunge. I did that myself. After college, just went ahead and decided to travel to Africa, and so it's hard. It's hard, but you recognize that you just have to take that leap of faith, and so that means really seeking out that chemistry with one person, which will lead to chemistry with another person, which will lead to the networking that really helps to kind of develop and to serve as the foundation for a career. So I just, wanted to emphasize that, even though it seems like a basic theme, many people are not moving forward in that way. And as we heard from the secretary and others, it's just that you really just have to move forward and kind of challenge the system and find those where you have the affinity, and where there's that shared sense of purpose, and where there are synergies and alignment, and try to find those with whom you can relate and move forward with. So anyway, I'm sorry to have missed the early part of this conversation. I'm available on LinkedIn for anyone who is interested in a career in international development, whether it's with UNICEF or others. I've worked with a number of philanthropic institutions in Africa. I was on the African continent for about 20 years. Coming back to the States about 3 years ago, but I also worked in congressional affairs and policy development and constituency development and membership organizations with foreign policy lobbies that kind of cherish the importance of African Americans' involvement. So I just wanted to say thank Thank you for having me on the panel.
Fantastic. And what a great way to end this. That is a perfect final word. I just want to say on behalf of BPIA, thank you so much to our panelists, especially navigating the technical issues to get here. This was an incredibly rich conversation, and it's recorded, so it will be available even after this.
Great.
Wonderful. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
And sometimes it takes a moment. Hello, everyone. We are back here at the main stage for our final guest appearance, who will be here today for the main stage area. So without further ado, I will allow the BPIA VP for Business and Economic Development, John Cal Williams, to introduce our next speaker. So Cal, go ahead and take it away.
That's it.